So you saw the video that we did with Dave, and the link for that is in the description. And it ends up that you are currently working with associations right now on restrictions, regulations. You'll correct me if I'm wrong in regard to where residents can store their lithium ion battery type devices. So
Yeah.
my first question would be is what kind of association are we talking about?
So I've seen them in different ones. We've seen them in the high rises, which you would expect there to be more issues with. And we've also seen them in more horizontal properties, age restricted communities. Really, it's not limited to one specific type of community association.
What brought them to this point?
So fear, they're reading the headlines, right? They're reading the news. They're realizing that a lot of these bikes are not regulated. They're being purchased off of third-party websites. The batteries are not supposed to be used for these particular types of devices. So they're looking at their insurance premiums going up, right? They're looking at all kinds of different issues and life safety issues. And they're wondering if they as a community need to do something to potentially, protect the residents.
And I'm going to put a link in the description for the interview we did with the insurance professional. Are we mostly talking about e-bikes today?
So there's e-bikes and e-scooters, right? Anything with a lithium-ion battery that's not really regulated. I mean, they're in vacuums, right? They're in everything, but we're specifically talking about those e-bikes and e-scooters.
And we got into a large conversation with the previous video about accommodations for handicap. So are we talking about purely just vehicles that people use at their leisure, like e-bikes, or are we also talking about people that require accommodations for like handicap scooters?
Yeah, so the way I've implemented it is there's a carve out, there's an exclusion for mobility assistance vehicles, right? So any of those scooters for handicapped, those obviously would be excluded. We don't want to step into the world of FHA violations and that kind of thing. So we're really just talking about those e-bikes and e-scooters that you'll see people try to use for work or use to get around the neighborhood.
So the association determines that they need to put some controls in regard to these lithium ion devices, and they come to you. So tell me how the process worked out and exactly how the restrictions work, regulations, or maybe you want to correct me on my terminology.
The way this was implemented was obviously looking at the governing documents and determining what powers the association has. Is it really broad, general health safety powers, or is there something more specific as far as what can be stored in units or the common elements? So once you determine really what the powers are, it kind of decides on the next steps. For this particular community, they wanted to ban outright. This is a high rise. They wanted to ban outright storage of e-bikes and e-scooters because there was nowhere else to store them other than in units. So they said that, if we see them in the community, we're going to issue a fine, and then eventually we're going to make you have to remove them or get rid of them. So that was the way that was handled there. And we really approved that through the resolution process. And we put everyone on notice of this and gave a little bit of a ramp up time for everyone when they had to actually discard the e-bikes and e-scooters. And we also discussed, though, potentially registering and having a registration of these things to be able to monitor whether they are appropriate or not to have stored in the community.
So I'm sure a lot of the owners were not thrilled. Have you received any objections, and how have you overcome them if you have received any from the owners?
Yeah, I mean, the majority are fine with it, honestly. There's always going to be a couple that raise their voices and show evidence or documentation as to why it is safe. Ultimately, if the board is empowered with doing this decision and making it happen, and they feel like it's supported by evidence and facts that these are dangerous in their particular community, then they were more than comfortable moving forward with it.
You had mentioned to me there's also a lot going on with governmental agencies restricting. Can you talk about that a little bit? So like boards actually have some backup on this.
So this one community really started from the town, the neighboring town, which had banned them. And they got wind of it and said, is this something that we can implement in our community if the town can do it? You're seeing in New York City, there's all kinds of regulations coming into play. And more, unfortunately, as you see more and more accidents, you're going to see more and more legislation and regulation regarding these what is now unregulated devices being stored in the common elements and inside of the units.
So I'm going to give you an opportunity to just kind of provide some closing thoughts on this. But one thing I'm taking away from this It seems like getting ahead of this before everyone has an e-bike is the way to go.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Before everyone in the community has one, and you have to make 150 people get rid of theirs, which is then going to create the real turmoil in your community. It's better to have this in place, and it's better to understand the science behind it, understand what's going on in your community, and understanding your building and whether this is a real threat in your building or not. Because in some buildings it may be okay, there may be an outside storage area for them, and so it's much easier to regulate. But in these tighter buildings and more urban areas, it's going to be incredibly difficult to regulate. So